What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Rock Your Brand podcast. And I am excited, nervous to share this episode with you guys. And this is something that I've been wanting to do. Didn't know if I wanted to do it because, well, I don't know. I just didn't really want to talk about it. But it is something that I think is really going to help at least one person. That's really my goal. I want to help at least one person that if they're thinking about starting a business or they're pivoting a business, they haven't maybe reached their financial goal. I want to give them some things to think about because sometimes the target that you're shooting for, it's one thing, and a lot of times it's financially. But once you hit that target and then you go, okay, now what? Or, okay, I hit that target. Am I happy? Did it meet all my expectations? Do I have more stress than I thought I was going to have? Like all of these different things. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I want to share that here with you today and really dig in and unpack how I walked away from a business that was doing $1.7 million per year and probably could have doubled that. And probably maybe even doubled that. There really was a lot of potential there. I'm going to share that with you, but I'm also going to share with you my plans moving forward. As if I was sitting down with my younger self, giving that younger self some advice, someone who's already been there, and to start laying out that business that not only makes me money, but also makes me happy. And I don't think that that's talked about enough, is where when you're building a business, you're usually like, I just want to make money. I just want to make money. I just want to make money. I don't care how I make money. I just want to get out of my 9-to-5 on my grind. And I totally get that. Been there, done that. But you also can really build the business, the lifestyle business that you want. And even though I've told myself this, because I've built several businesses, I've told myself this: if you get something that starts to take, and maybe it's not 100% of the direction that you want to go, or maybe you went into a certain direction and now you can't really get out of that direction because you've painted yourself into a corner. Those are things that we can prevent if we do it early enough. And the crazy thing is, I started to see this happen again, like recently. And so that's why I wanted to jump on here, do this live. I know this isn't Etsy related or Amazon related or any of the other things, right, of building a business, a brand. But I will promise you this: if you are in the beginning stages, or like I said, pivoting or growing your business, this will probably get you to think a little bit differently of your future plans. I hope it will anyway. And I hope it helps at least one person think about this before they go forward and put all their eggs in one basket, or really just kind of paint themselves into a corner. So other thing I want to say is, if you guys have any questions for me while we're going through this, by all means, this is the time. All right. I'm literally going to open it up here and give you guys the opportunity to ask me any questions. And it doesn't have to be related to this topic. It could be related to anything business, or even where you are in your journey. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. That's what we're going to be doing here today. Hopefully you guys will stick around and get some value, and hopefully I can help you guys not make these mistakes, or at least correct them before it's too late. All right. So Chris, what do you think, man? You've been with me for the whole ride here, so you know the story. We're going to unpack it a little bit.
Yeah, well, Scott, I think we just realized a couple weeks ago that we've been doing stuff together for 8 years now.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think about, because I was like a little baby at that point. I still have a little bit of the baby face going on, but I'm definitely feeling a little older than I was 8 years ago. The two things I think before we really jump into this is, first, the 1.7 million. And I know one of the reasons that you were a little, for lack of a better term, shy about sharing this, is that number does sound kind of like a brag to a lot of people, where they're like, oh, I'm just trying to replace my 9-to-5 job income. But that income all kind of came out of the same kind of stuff that we're talking about now, right? It just happened to grow and scale better than some of the other things that you had done in the past. And I know you have a video coming up on the YouTube channel about all of the different side hustles you've done that have made you more than the average American salary in a year. And that's something I want people to take away before we really get in. And like, we don't necessarily even need to break down the number. It's not about the number. It's about the fact that the number is what most people chase with this. And they say, if I could make $1 million a year, or if I could make 1.7 or $2 million a year, everything would be okay. And in some cases, that's true. And I know you have another interview coming up with somebody who's able to do that and still balance life with family and some of those kinds of things. But a lot of times we get so focused on that number that we forget about why we're doing these things in the first place. And you just said something that I think is really powerful, which is if we forget why we're doing it in the first place, then that number is totally irrelevant. Right? Like you can be on paper successful, but if the other things in your life are falling behind or aren't where you want them to be, then are you really successful? And did you escape the 9-to-5 that you're trying to escape from just to create yourself another job? Or did you create yourself a lifestyle, which I think really is what most people are after, but they get so focused on that number and just getting out of the 9-to-5 that they forget that the whole reason they hated their 9-to-5 is that they're not working 9-to-5. They're working 60, 70, 80 hours a week to make ends meet. And yes, if you're making $1.7 million a year and working 80 hours a week, it feels a heck of a lot better than working 80 hours a week and making $50,000 a year. But you're still working 80 hours a week or 70 hours a week, whatever that number is. And the other things that you are casting aside to make the $50,000 now still get cast aside when you're making 1.7. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I want to be clear on the 1.7. Like there was a lot going into that to make that money. And that's what Chris is kind of, referring to. And we'll go over the different things. And this actually affected my health. And that was the wake up call. Like my wife looked at me and said, like, what the heck are we doing here? Like, some of you that know my full story, I started, my first online business because I wanted to have more time with my family. And that's really the whole thing I've always been chasing is like time. It's not really the money, but then there's always that money goal. And it's, we all got egos, right? We all have egos. It doesn't matter. We can say we don't, but we all have egos. And it's like, and then you start seeing other people, what they're doing. And you're not as successful if you don't have like a team. You're not as successful if you don't have the $1 million, 7-figure number there, like all of those things. And you kind of get caught up in that. And the big thing here is that I want people to understand is that, yes, chasing that number, but really getting clear on what that number really means and what it's going to do for you for what you're really trying to achieve. So right now, to me, the number that I chase is really just so I have something to chase to kind of measure against. Same thing with YouTube. Like right now, we've been going really, really hard on YouTube and we're loving it. But we're looking at subscribers, even though subscribers don't really, they don't contribute a lot to your views, which a lot of people think they do. They don't. But for us, it's a measure of like, are people enjoying the content enough to subscribe? And if they are, that's good. So we're like, okay, we're at 60,000 subscribers. Let's get to 100. If we get to 100, we know that we've grown our audience. We know we've grown the views. So that's a different number. A financial number is a lot of times it's just like, okay, we're serving more people. Right. And all of those things. So to me, I always look at a number like that, not necessarily like, oh, look at me. I made, $1 million. Like, and again, not that entire amount of money went into my bank account, right? It just, there's bills to pay too. And the bigger you get, the more bills and the more responsibilities. And you throw an event like we did that you get, you're $150,000 on the hook for, all of the different things. So the reason, like I said, the reason why I wanted to share this is because I want you to see that for yourself. I want you to think about yourself. What is the number that you're shooting for? Why are you shooting for that? And then what business do you want to create that you can hit that? But more importantly, what one can you hit it with and still be happy and still have time, right? And not be stressed out of your mind. That's the big thing here.
So Scott, you alluded to this, but I want to start with why we're sharing this and why now. Like, why is this something that's kind of weighing on you to share with everybody and make sure that it's at the top of their mind as well right now?
Yeah, well, because, okay, a lot of you that are watching this are either, watching on YouTube, or maybe you're on Facebook, but primarily probably YouTube. And you're thinking to yourselves, well, Scott, I've watched some of your other stuff, and it's a lot of Etsy stuff, or maybe it's years ago I saw Amazon stuff. Well, recently it's been Etsy stuff. Okay. And that's because I've always taught what I'm doing. That's the only way that I'll ever teach what I'm doing. I have to do it, get a result, and then I share. I don't go, here's a thought that I think would work, and this is how I think you could make money, or I heard other people were making money, so I'm going to tell you that you could do that, but I've never done it. I don't do that, right? I don't feel good about it doing it that. I have to at least do it, okay? So I have to be in the trenches. And so you guys all know, most of you, that my wife started an Etsy shop on the side. And I'm like, let me just go ahead and kind of get in there and play a little bit with my marketing and with, brand creating and stuff, because we have a brand called Brand Creators. I'm like, it'd be kind of fun to get in there and kind of play with the Etsy. And I started doing that. And I really enjoyed it. And I still enjoy it. But I started to see that we were only now able to talk about Etsy stuff, when in reality, Etsy is a very, very, very small portion of a business. And I guess what I want to do now is be able to come in and say, listen, I made that mistake of just going all in on a platform and then finding out I didn't have all of the other assets or all of the other things that made it a brand. Okay. And so right now, if someone was to ask me, like, what do you do on your YouTube channel? I'd be like, I publish a lot of stuff on Etsy. But I started seeing that that's how I started to look, right? I'm going to be the Etsy guy. Well, back in the day, the $1.7 million business was, and some of you that are watching this, and let me know in the comments if you guys have listened to the Amazing Seller podcast, which was years ago, which we've rebranded to Brand Creators. But that started by me sharing stuff on Amazon. And then that podcast became Amazon stuff. And now we started to talk about Etsy. So everything starts to become Etsy, right? And that's just because that's what I'm into. So that's what I'm teaching. But in reality, I don't want to be known as the Etsy guy or the Amazon guy, right? And so I had to look at this and go, wait a minute, Scott, this is what happened over here. Scott, do you remember what happened over here? And we'll get into like the reason why, Chris, and like when we made that decision to pivot and we knew that we were going to take a loss and not really a loss, but we weren't going to be making the money we were making. We knew that and why we decided to do that. But right now, if you're watching this and you're like, Scott, how does this relate to me? This is how it relates to you. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, meaning if someone asks you, and I did a survey the other day on YouTube, if someone asks you, if you're starting on Etsy right now and you're building an Etsy, shop, you're not an Etsy business. Please get that out of your vocabulary, because that's going to trap you into being an Etsy business, right? You're creating a business that just happens to sell products on Etsy, and you are going to be able to build out all the other stuff that it takes to build a real business. And then that's what will differentiate you. So that's why I'm sharing this, because I went down that road and, it works for a little while, but it's also risky. And then you become not happy. I'm like, I don't want to be, or I'll give you another example. Let's say that you're looking to find something to sell, right? And I always tell everyone that I'm teaching or coaching or giving recommendations to, I'm like, don't just go after a niche because it makes a lot of money. Go after one that you're interested in or that you're passionate about so you enjoy it. That's what I say. And there's a reason behind that, because I've done the other. I've went after where the money is and I've just stayed there, right? Now, the 1.7 million example, that was like a mix. It started out as something I was doing, Amazon, doing really well, teaching it. And then I started to, I don't want to say get bored of it, but I started to say, I don't want to be known as this. I'm more than that. I'm a business person. I build brands, right? And I build audiences and I use email and I do all of these other things. That's not just an Amazon business. And so once I saw that was happening, I said, you know what, we gotta change something. So Chris, I know I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but stop me anytime.
No, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And I think this is something we've kind of touched around the edges of over the last few months through these live sessions. You'll start seeing a little bit more of this on the static videos, like the non-live videos, the pre-recorded videos as well on this channel. But Scott, you and I have been talking about not being platform dependent, not being product dependent. And it actually took me back to 2017, 2018, when we really were talking about that stuff in terms of Amazon, because we saw Amazon businesses going down that same route. And one of the things that you and I have noticed in the Etsy seller community is that it's following a very similar path to what Amazon FBA private label looked like in 2016, 2017, 2018, in that there is a huge opportunity, but there's also an opportunity to build this the right way from the beginning, rather than a year or two from now, realizing that you are platform dependent, realizing that you are dependent on the whims of Etsy. And we can avoid that because it's not what we do in our own businesses, in the things that you and I do together. We purposely are not platform dependent. We are redundant in the things that we do. We have an email list, we have Facebook groups, we have ways of getting in touch with our people just in case something happens, right? And if you are in the place where you're starting the business now, or you've started to make progress towards where you want to be eventually, now is the time to make that pivot rather than 2 years from now. And so I think people do need to hear that. But what I want to do, Scott, is I want to take you back to 2019, I believe it was. And what made 2019 different from the previous years? Because the Amazing Seller existed before 2019, right?
Yep.
We've been doing business together 8 years or so. I think it started tax day 2015, like officially, right?
Yep.
In terms of it being a business that didn't just have some affiliate revenue coming in at that point.
Right.
But what made 2019 more successful, and also what made it different than what had happened previously?
Yeah. Okay. The thing that made it really successful was there was a lot of opportunity for me. And the big reason why is because I built up a very, very large, loyal audience. And some of you on here right now, I saw a few of you say, like, yeah, you remember back in the day, right, of the Amazing Seller podcast. And some of you said you've had your start. And the crazy thing is like, that was awesome. Like, that was an awesome part of my life. I can't tell you how many $1 million businesses I helped start because of that podcast. And I know a lot of times people are like, I don't want to take the credit, and I'm not taking the credit, but I am going to take the credit that I sparked the idea, or I gave you the information on the podcast for you to then go run with. Right. And I'm proud of that. Like, that's a really cool thing. And there's so many people that I've met that have told me those stories, even a 6-figure business, it's just changed their life. So no regrets. But basically, once I started to see, and Chris, some people don't know the entire story. We can go back there a little bit and kind of talk about even how that podcast started, right? But it became, I guess, like, I was aware of the audience was there. Okay. And we'll get into audience here really, really soon in this episode, because I want to go deep on audience building, because it's huge. But once I had the attention, once I had a loyal audience, they started asking for things, right? They started wanting things, or they would support things, right, that I was doing. So just for an example, I had people that would say, Scott, have you ever done a mastermind? Like, would you do a mastermind? And, we just want to be, having you take charge, be the leader of the mastermind, and help us with our businesses more on a one-on-one basis. And I didn't really want to do that at the time. And I was like, oh, I don't know how that would work. I'm limiting myself to how many people I can actually help. So we ended up doing it. I tested it for a year, and it was great, by the way. It was an amazing mastermind, but I learned a lot about that I didn't really enjoy, being, I guess, not, kind of responsible, but also like dependent on when, for an entire year. Right. So I did that. And guys, that was an expensive mastermind, like $25,000 to be part of that mastermind. And it was great, but I felt a huge amount of stress. Stress is a big thing in this story. So stick with me, because, stress can really, really do a number on you. And it actually It did. It scared me. It scared my wife. And that's kind of where the pivot came in. But, we had that opportunity, right? And that was awesome. And I got to invite people over to, I have a lake house that I turned into an Airbnb. I was able to invite people there 3 times a year and hang out and talk business and help them and mastermind. It was an unbelievable experience, but I also had a great deal of stress. So there's that opportunity. Then I was able to throw my very first event, Brand Accelerator Live. And we did great with that. We had over 200 people show up from all over the world. That was awesome. Huge amount of stress. Did that. Wrote a book. Some of you don't know. Wrote a book called The Take Action Effect. If you want to know how to start a brand from scratch, there's the book for you guys right there. All the stories are right in here. Amazon, you can go grab a copy. But basically had to write that book 12 months. And I was writing it behind the scenes of planning the event and putting on the event and all of those things, right? Stress, right? But I wanted to do it. I wanted to walk out on stage. I wanted to release that book. I did. I made it happen. But it was a great deal of stress. Then, while all this is going on, I'm also building a business, a brand with a neighbor of mine, and I'm dealing with logistic problems, and I'm dealing with, we're not being able to get our products, or Amazon suspended one of our listings, and now we have to go back and forth. And granted, I didn't do a lot of that. My partner did, but I still had to deal with it, right? And we ended up selling that business, which was great. But I was dealing with that. And I had some products that I was selling privately by myself that I got started on Amazon with, right? So we had that going on, right? And then just life in general, right? My 15-year-old daughter's heavily into beach volleyball, and we're trying to go do that. And then you got life, right? So all of that stuff. And I probably left things out. We had a course that we were selling at the time called Private Label Classroom. And that was doing great. I did a webinar, a workshop every single week for a year and a half, almost 2 years, without skipping a week. Every single time we would do one, we would sell our courses, and then I would get more people to work with. It worked. It was a lot of work, a lot of stress. I was recording 3 podcast episodes every single week doing that, right? Then we started introducing Facebook ads, trying to get new people in, and that whole thing. So it turned into this monster of a business that was just draining me and stressing me out. So Chris, I mean, that's the high level that I kind of like can refer back to and stuff. Do you want to dig into any area there?
Yeah. So Matt over on Facebook just said, "You're making me feel extremely lazy, LOL." Here's the deal, Matt, right? Like this 1.7 and all of the things that were going on, this was not Scott by himself. This was Scott with a bunch of people doing other things. And that's part of what leads to the stress. And Scott, I know one of the blessings and the curses that you have as a human being is that you have what I call extreme ownership, right? And if you've read Jocko Willink's book by the same name, you guys would know this. If you haven't, it's definitely worth a read if you're considering starting your own business. But in everything that you do, Scott, you have ownership. So if you have people on your team, you feel 100% responsible for everything that happens to them in their life, right? You feel responsible for the roof that's over their head. You feel responsible for all of those things. And so you take a lot of that pressure onto yourself, which is a good thing because it helps you make strategic decisions in the right way. But it's also a bad thing because it leads you down that path of more and more stress. Does that make sense?
No, 100%. I mean, I'll be honest, right? Like once we started bringing more people in and building the team, and we didn't have a massive team, by the way. I mean, we had some VAs, we had some people we were working with, the agencies. I classify them as team members, right? We had to still do a meeting with them, or someone on our team had to do the meeting and then come back to us and then do a meeting and all of that stuff, right? And it just, you do start to feel like, man, I hope everyone is into this as I am. And I hope everyone is satisfied with what they're making and what this is bringing in for them. So you start to take on not just me and my wife, right? Like when it was me and my wife, it was very simple. We'd have a car ride, right? We'd be talking and we'd know where we were, but I don't know what Chris is thinking. I don't know what, the guy that we had running ads and he's going to, wants to charge us more because we're asking for more stuff. Like, I don't know what he's expecting. Right. So there's that kind of starts to weigh on you. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't build a big team and all that stuff. If that's what you want to do, go for it. Whenever I hear about it, I kind of cringe a little bit. And this goes back to the days that I was in my father's construction company and I was running probably 15 guys, probably like 6-7 crews where I had to manage them. And every day I had to worry about them and us making sure that we're going to have enough work for them and all of that stuff. Right. So it starts to weigh on you. And that's not my thing. I want to go lean and I still want to make good money, but I don't need to make the kind of money that the Lamborghini guys are flashing with the rented Lamborghini and the rented house. I'm not going there, but you get what I'm saying, right? I'm more about lifestyle. I'm more about freedom. And I'm more about, it was great. I heard this from Justin Welsh. I'll give him a shout out on Twitter. I'm not a Twitter guy, but I went on Twitter. I found him through a podcast that he was on. It was Noah Kagan's, and it was a solopreneur, someone that's doing $2 million a year with only himself. And the one thing he said, someone said, well, why don't you scale this thing to 4 or 5 or 6 million? He's like, the way that I'm going to scale is by maintaining the money I'm making and working a little bit less or doing more of what I want to work on. And I was like, that's brilliant. That's what I want to do. And that actually triggered me to say, Scott, take a step back from what's going on right this second. We're starting to go down that path of maybe not returning or having to pull way back and do a whole repivot. Let's do it now. And let's start thinking about strategically, how can you create a business that's still lean, that you enjoy doing the activities that you need to do, you're helping people, and you're still making a good living. And that's really kind of where we had to zoom out and kind of look at that stuff.
So there's a lot of comments coming in, and I do want to get to a roadmap about how to get out of this when we get to the end. But I want to work through this story for the people who haven't hit that realization yet. I know somebody over on YouTube said, wow, if all this happens at 1.7 million, I'm going to get to 1.6 and cruise at that level. And that's a great snarky comment, but right, to get to 1.6, it's basically the same things you're doing at 1.7. And so that comes back to the question of, why are you doing this? Right. And we'll cover this kind of at the end. I do want to walk through the roadmap. But Scott, you mentioned a couple different kind of critical points in 2019, and I wanted to dive into kind of when that realization actually happened and what happened that made you realize that things were starting to not go wrong isn't the right word, but kind of spin out of control and go beyond where you felt comfortable. So like, was there a single moment or was it a series of things? Like, what happened there?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think this is really, really important. And I appreciate everyone that's commenting. I see someone in there says, I'm so glad that you're addressing this type of stress. I published my book this past weekend, plus having my Etsy shop. I was a nuclear medicine tech supervisor for many years, lots of stress. Lean is my goal. Yeah. So I'm glad that it's resonating with some of you. And guys, if you do think that this would help anybody out there, just share it, like it, give it a little bit of love. Really, my goal here in this thing is to help at least one person and at least let them know that there are options. So the big thing that was the wake-up call, I was feeling the stress. Mainly, it started coming to a head when I was planning the event, that we were on the hook for like $125,000, right? Meaning that you have to book rooms. If you don't, you're going to be on the hook for it. Like all that stuff. You got to fill seats, all that stuff. And then the book. Like those two together was really, really stressful. And we had the mastermind still going on. So we had all that stuff. What happened was this. I noticed that on my neck, I had like these little, it looked like a I'll never forget it. It looked like a little spider bite. Like, you get a little spider bite or a little bug bite, and it's just kind of like a little welt. And I was like, that's kind of weird. I must have got bit by a spider in the middle of the night or something. And day goes on and I kept itching a little bit. So I'm like, yeah, definitely a bite. So I look again and it's got another one down below it, but it's connected. And I'm like, that's weird. And then the next morning I wake up and it's down. It's like a little bit of a line, a reddish line that's kind of coming down. I'm like, what the heck? So I ended up going to the doctors and found out that I had shingles. And the doctor said, are you under a lot of stress? I said, kinda. And he said, well, you got shingles and, we'll give you a little bit of medicine or whatever, and it'll clear it up, but you got to reduce your stress, man. It's going to kill you. because, stress is the silent killer. We all hear about it. But you gotta chill out, and I'm like, okay, well, how do I do that? So I leaned into Chris and our team at the time. And I told him, listen, I gotta slow this thing down a little bit. This isn't doing good. My wife looked at me and she's like, what are you doing? Like, you got to slow down. Like, I'm like, I know. I mean, my wife's always like that. Like, don't go play pickleball and get hurt. Don't come back here with a sprained ankle. Don't do that. And I'm like, I'm not, I'll take it easy. And then I come back limping or something. Right. Cause it's just what I do. I can't go slow. Right. So I think about 2 months went back, and I'll never forget it. This was during one of our mastermind meetings. And Chris, I don't know if I even told you if this happened. But it was the night before we were going to be having about 10 of our mastermind members coming in. We were at the lake house, and I was, getting ready in the morning, and I looked on my neck and I noticed another little bump. And I'm like, oh, come on. Don't even tell me. And wasn't even an hour later, I looked again because now I'm paranoid. I go in the mirror and I noticed it starts coming down again. I go, I got it. I got shingles again. And this was less than a year after that first thing. So I call my wife. I go, is there any way that you can call the doctor and get another prescription of that stuff that they gave me the last time? She's like, I'll try. And she's like, are you kidding? She goes, you're scaring me. Like I know, but once this event's over, we're going to be good, And so anyway, long story short is I had the shingles again, and took my medicine, it fixed it. Knock on wood. I have not had it since, but it's also after I decided to have a really, hard conversation with my wife, and really also with, my team at the time, and just really like, I need to think about this. I need to think about what I'm actually doing here and who I'm doing it for, and not being the one that's just chasing a number because you want to chase a number because it's there, and do something that's going to light you up, help people, but still be able to reduce that amount of stress. So that's the story, Chris.
Yeah. And I know I do remember that second time, because I think we were already at the lake house.
Yeah. It was
it happened again.
Yeah.
You're like, well, it happened again. We need to change something. Right. Yeah. And that was kind of your initial reaction. And so that then begs the question, Scott, you're going through this. What is the thought process in your head? You need to change something. You know that you need to pull back and do less. And this is where a lot of people say, well, just be more team dependent, right? Build out that team even more so that you can maintain that same level. Like, what was the thought process going through your head at that point about what you wanted to do? And then we can dive into, like, was there an exit plan or anything like that? So you have the realization that this is not just affecting your life in general, but your literal health. What is going through your head at that point in terms of what you want to do with the business?
I think I already started to feel like we were so Amazon focused, like teaching Amazon. And I started to feel like that was a job. I started to feel like I had to talk about that because that's what people were showing up for. And that was stress. Right. So it kind of goes back to even like how I said earlier, like I kind of painted myself into a corner. And the reason why I painted myself into a corner is because I started to see that I was having success after I started a podcast, just not even thinking I was going to start a business from it, by the way. So those of you that don't know, the quick story I'll give you on that is, I started dabbling in Amazon as my wife and I were, doing our own stuff in the photography space, online and offline. And I started dabbling with private label. And then because I knew about audience building, because we've done it before, I'm like, maybe I just build an audience. We'll see where this goes. And that podcast took off. To date, we're over 19 million downloads. And like within the first year, we had probably 4 million downloads. So it grew very fast. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy. Like this audience is amazing. And then I started to monetize it with affiliate stuff and, tools and stuff that I was using. And it's always about stuff that I'm using or doing. And then we did a webinar and we sold our first course and all of that stuff. And that's really where it took off. But I started to feel as though, okay, I built this thing. but now it's just about Amazon, and that's all I can really talk about. And I don't just want to talk about that because I am someone that has built businesses, brands, whether it's a brick and mortar, whether it's a digital product business with my photography stuff, all of those different things. And I'm like, that's not really who I want to be in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years. So what do I want to be talking about? Who do I want to be serving? And that's really what I had to do. I had to take a step back and sit down with myself and say, who do I want to serve? And that took a long time. I mean, even to this day, I'm still figuring out who the audience is for me right now. And if I was to kind of sum it all up, guys, the biggest thing that I've learned over the years that's worked for me every single freaking time is building an audience. Like, if you build an audience, you can basically, write your own ticket. The problem is if you build the wrong audience, now you're trapped. And that's, I think, the big realization. Like, I think I'm good at building audiences. I think, Chris, you and I both together are an amazing team to build audiences. But we also know now that you have to pick the right audience that you want to serve, or else you're going to basically be talking about stuff that you don't want to talk about for the next 5 years, right? I don't want to be trapped to only talk about one specific topic. Does that make sense, Chris? Did that answer your question?
It does. And so that, that gives me a little bit of insight into your mindset there. And so you're going through all of this. 2019 is coming to a close. You realize it's one of the more successful years. Scott, is it fair to say that that's the most successful year on paper that you've had?
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, outside of like selling a house and adding that revenue into the bottom line.
100%.
Right? And so you're like doing your end of the year accounting, and you realize, okay, we've done just a little over 1.7 million, but I'm not happy. What was the exit plan at that point? Or did you just say, screw it, pull the ripcord, I'm out? Like, what led you to making the pivot at the beginning of 2020? Which do you even remember 2020? That feels like 5 years ago at this point. I mean, it was 3 years ago at this point. But what was the exit plan out of that? Because you can't just walk away from that, or can you, if you find yourself in that situation?
I think we kind of did. I mean, okay, so here was the first stab at it, right? And again, we're still, like, even after, 2 years, 2.5 years, close to 3 years, like, we're still in a pivot in a sense, right? Like, so the very first thing was this: we need to change the name. And remember, now everything that I did was under the Amazing Seller brand. Now, I still have the Amazing Seller LLC, and that's actually the top level of my brand. And then kind of everything kind of funnels underneath that. So that's kind of like my umbrella brand, because once again, everything was built around that. Now, to me, that's just like an educational, like, info product brand. But I wanted to take the podcast and kind of pivot that. So that was the first move. And it was kind of like, okay, how can we do this? Let's just start talking about different things. Let's start talking about email marketing. Let's start talking about content creation. Let's talk about all of the different things that we're doing and that where we're going, and try to bring that to the audience and see if the audience resonates with it. Now, I'll be honest, we lost some of our audience. I knew that was going to happen, but I was okay with that because, like I've always said, I'd rather have 1,000 true fans than 100,000, fans. Right. And there's an article out there, and Chris, you'll probably remember the guy's name, but there's an article out there called Your True 1,000 Fans or something like that. Pat Flynn wrote a book called Super Fans. It's the same idea. So as much as you're like, you want to have that big number, I knew that I was going to be pulling back because we were going to be doing a pivot. So the very first thing was renaming the brand, right? So we went to brand creators, because that really can be anything, right? Like right now, if you're watching this, you probably saw a lot of stuff on Etsy, on the YouTube channel. Well, it still falls under a brand in creating a brand, right? So I knew that was going to be a safe bet to be whatever we wanted to do in the future. We'd be able to do that. And then the podcast, I renamed that Rock Your Brand. Meaning, basically kind of look like with the, rock band kind of, analogy or whatever, because I'm a musician. I play guitar. I was in bands and I like 80s and 90s hair metal. You know what I mean? Like, so I was like, I, kind of want to play into that a little bit. And that's where Rock Your Brand came in, which I love. And so that will go to the grave with me. Like I can do Rock Your Brand for the rest of time, right? Brand creators, I could do that for the rest of time. What I do under those, different properties, that's to be determined, And so like right now we're getting attention from Etsy, right? Etsy people, you maybe watching this, but I want to get your attention on the one thing so I can really show you how to build a true brand. So that's what I think is important here. And that's kind of where the shift happened, where that was the initial pivot, Chris. I think that was your question. Like, where did we make that first move? And I think it was a conversation we had that was like, what are we going to do to make this happen?
Yeah, no, I was actually at my parents' house, and I think we jumped on the phone, which was a rare occurrence, right? You and I talk all day, but it's not like a structured conversation ever. And we had a long conversation about it. And then thankfully, we had a little bit of the blessing of not being able to do anything else in early 2020 and, did kind of the whole rebrand in like a week because there was nothing else to do and nobody could go anywhere or do anything anyway. So I might as well sit down and build out a new website and go through all the branding changes and all of those kinds of things. And so, Scott, the question that I have, less pertaining to the specific situation that we were dealing with, but if somebody finds themselves in this situation, would you recommend having more of an exit plan than we had? Or do you say you got to go back to the beginning and figure out if there's anything salvageable? Does that make sense? Because there were definitely components, right? You had the audience. We knew that was going to shrink to some extent. We didn't know how far. Yep. Mm-hmm. But if somebody finds themselves in this situation, guys, we will get to the roadmap for how to avoid this. But yep. If you are already in this situation and you're realizing that you are not where you want to be in terms of the rest of your life, would you suggest just pulling the ripcord and saying, I'm going to burn it to the ground and start over? What is your advice for people that are in this situation right now in terms of what they can do to remove themselves from that situation and not lose all of their revenue?
Yeah. And that's a tough one, right? Like if you have a business that's generating a significant amount of money, in order to do it, you kind of have to look at your finances and seeing like, okay, I'm going to take a hit on this. What's it going to mean to my livelihood and all of those things? So, and again, like if you guys are watching this and you're like, well, I'm not in that situation, I'm starting or whatever, I'm going to definitely give you what I would do. In basically what I'm doing right this second. So it's kind of, what's current, like right now. But I would say like, depending on again, like how far you're into the brand, if you want to rebrand, you do have to look at the audience. You have to look at like your product suite. What are you offering right now? Like we have products that we sold back in the day, courses on Amazon. We don't sell them anymore, right? We just pull them off the shelf. We're not going to update them anymore. They're still great content, but they're not updated. So we're not going to sell them, right? Some people could still sell them and say, oh, well, it's, it's as is, but we didn't want to do that. And I didn't want to attract people that are like coming to me for Amazon advice. So that's why we kind of put that off. But, for someone that's looking to pivot, it is going to be dependent on how much revenue is actually coming in. And is there an angle? That's why I always tell people too, when you are picking your niche, is to try to pick one that's a little bit broader, but then from there, you're able to have these sub niches. And then if one of these sub niches takes off and you're interested in that sub niche, then build that out. Right. So I would say the advice would be, number one, it's dependent on where you are in, your business. If it's not too far in, you might just want to pull the cord and just start over from scratch. You know what I mean? It does depend. And sometimes that stings, but sometimes that's what needs to happen in order to kind of make a clean start, if you will.
Yeah. And I think my take on that, the thing that we knew we could fall back on was the audience. Right. So you have to take an inventory of the business, say, where's the revenue coming from? What are the things that I can pull back on that are using the most of my time or giving me the most stress? And is there a better way of doing that? And the decision tree, for lack of a better term, that I like to see people go through is elimination, delegation, and automation, right? And that's actually probably the wrong order, right? It would be automation, delegation, elimination. So is there something that I can do to automate this process and have that take the stress and the time away? If so, then I should look into that. If I can't automate it, right? Like it's true customer service, or it's time doing the mastermind where I'm sitting in front of people. Like, unfortunately, even in 2023, we're not at a place where we can have ScottBot 4000 that can dish out e-commerce advice or brand building advice or content creation advice, right? So you have to be physically present for those things. So if you can't automate it, can you delegate it? Well, again, in the case of something like a mastermind, you probably can't delegate that. Yes, I'm there. Yes, other people from our team are there, but you still had to be there, right? And so that then leaves us with elimination. And if you find yourself in this same situation where you aren't getting the success in the other areas of your life, you need to walk through that same process. And in the case of The Amazing Seller and a lot of the things that we were doing, it fell onto elimination because they were time heavy, right? And they weren't necessarily able to be automated, or they just weren't where we wanted to be at that point. And if that's the case, then you have to eliminate them, and you have to be willing to accept the loss of revenue that comes with those things when you do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, and again, like some people that are going to be watching this are like, like I'm not near the place where I'm going to, delegate or hire people and stuff like that. So, Chris is speaking a little bit of a higher level. As far as like,
even in your case, right? Like you don't want to have a team. So that option is out off the table. So then it's just automate or eliminate, right?
Yeah.
And if that's where you're at, that's okay too. If it's critical to the business, it's something you want to do, and you can't automate it and you don't want to eliminate it, then there's always that delegation option.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think for people when they're starting, they're like, and I was there, doing the same thing. Like, I don't care what it takes. I'm going to get there. And when I get there, then I'll figure it out. Right. Like, I don't care. And going through that whole process, you don't realize the stress you're putting yourself under, the things that you're doing, maybe for the wrong reasons, or you're just doing it because you feel you have to do it now. And I think it's just a big wake-up call for me personally, that I'm like, what does Scott resonate right now at 50 years old, right? I resonate with someone that says, I want to build either a solopreneur type business or a very, very lean business. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not a solopreneur because I got Chris, but if it wasn't Chris, it would be solo because it would just be me and my wife, and her and I are like one. So it's like, it wouldn't. And I say that, does that mean I wouldn't hire, like a VA? No, of course I would. Like right now, I hire my son to do our videos. So he edits all our videos on YouTube. He's 25 years old. He's a school teacher. He can use the extra money and he's good at video, right? He's on my team, but he's my family member. So I like it because I can trust him and all that stuff. And I'm giving him something and he sees the vision of what we're doing here too. So I have a few writers that do some of our content. So there, it's not that I'm opposed to doing that, but I would only do that in order to put out or create things that we want to put out there that are going to help us achieve the result we're trying to do, which for us is a lot of, I would rather show up and create content, serve the market, maybe do a workshop on a weekend, or maybe sell a workshop recording that we've done in the past, work with partners like affiliate partners, and just create content and build the audience. Like that's what I love doing, right? Like helping people, serving people. And then we're able to get, basically compensated by some of those other things. And that's it. Like, that's what I want the business to be. And that's what I'm working towards building. So I just think that it does depend on where you are, but you also are in control of where the business can be, but you have to be aware of those traps or those things that can happen to you.
So with that in mind, Scott, before we dive into like the roadmap of this, is there anything else that you wanted to share of that story? And were there any other lessons that you think people could take away from that before we dive into the roadmap of how to avoid that to begin with?
Yeah, well, okay. And guys, if you have any questions for me, drop them in there. I think we covered a lot of it. My biggest thing is like, if I'm sitting across the table right now with my younger self, right? And I'm like, listen, here's what I want you to understand. Right now, no matter what you are doing, you need to focus on the niche that you are interested in, that you want to serve, and do not go outside of that. Like, that's what I would say. And then that younger self might be like, yeah, but I want to make money. What's the quickest way to make the money? Like, listen, there's ways that we can make the money, but I want you to realize that choosing the niche that you're interested in, I don't like to say the word passionate, but it does help if you're passionate. But if you're interested in it, passionate would be great. And something that you think that you can do long term and stick with it, you're golden. But don't go outside the lines as far as, but over here, crypto is doing great. So I'm just going to jump on the cryptocurrency thingy. You know what I mean? Because it's making money right now. Don't do it. Okay, Scott, don't do it. That's what I would tell myself.
With that being said, Scott, if somebody's just getting started, or they've already started, but they're not at the place where they're hitting burnout or casting things aside or running into health issues because they're stressing themselves beyond their limits, what does that roadmap look like? And what I'd like to do with this is start kind of generically with the points, and then come in and give people a little bit of specific guidance about what we would do right now, because I don't think the generic version of this roadmap doesn't really change, but the specific way that we execute on this roadmap might. Does that make sense? So to me, before you ever even look at a niche, you need to understand what the goal is, right? So to me, that's really starting with the end in mind. And in your case, what is that goal? Like, what is the reason that you started the photography business to start? Like, let's go back past The Amazing Seller. What is the reason that you wanted to get out of your 9 to 5, which wasn't really a 9 to 5. It was actually a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what made you want to make that pivot to begin with? And why did you make the decisions that you made along the way? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, okay. So, I mean, I've always said this, and anybody that's followed any of my work for any period of time, is it always came down to wanting to get out of the 9 to 5 so I could be home with my family. And we're going back years now. I said my son's 25, but he was 2 years old when we started our photography business. So 23 years ago. And so, I was able now to be with him through T-ball, through baseball, right? All the way on up, basketball, like all the things. My daughter, Alexis, I was able to be with her, who she's going to be 28 years old, right? 2 grandkids now. Crazy. But, I wanted to be there for her, with her, she was dabbling with soccer and basketball and all the sports. And then she went in and started doing dance. And then she started doing piano, like all these different things that she's trying. I was at everything. A school event, I wanted to be there. So to me, the only way I was going to be able to make that happen is to be my own boss, right? Is to be self-employed and to be able to dictate my own hours. And our first out was my wife and I starting a photography business, which, by the way, we knew nothing about photography. So we read a lot of books back then. There wasn't really even YouTube going on back in the day. It wasn't even digital back then. And we were able to do it. And we built that up to a pretty good little successful business, a 6-figure business. And back in the day, that was a lot of money too. So the main reason for me was always time. It was always time and flexibility. I mean, you could say freedom, but it was time and flexibility, which comes down to freedom, right? Being able to say, oh, Scotty's got a game at 4:30. I got to be there at 3:30 to help prep the field. Okay. No appointments that day or at that time. Oh, kids got to get picked up at 2:15. Hey, Lisa, I got it. Don't worry about it. You can stay home. I'll go get the kids. Right. That was my schedule. And literally we made that a reality, but we would then have to work maybe in the evening a little bit, or we'd have to work when the kids were at school and all of those things. So it really came down to always that. But what happened was, with the 1.7 million example, is that started to cut into my free time. That started to cut into my morals and my beliefs and things that I started this for. Right. So did that help, Chris? Did I answer that?
It did. And I think the thing I want people to take away from that is you have to understand what that goal is. And if you find yourself, and realistically, as an entrepreneur, you should sit down every few months and revisit that goal. Step one is that still your goal, right? Like, as your kids are getting older, right, Scott, like that may change a little bit, right? You're now down to one in the house, right? And you have,
Well, yes, but here's an interesting thing, Chris. You don't even know this. The last 2 days, my son's a school teacher, so he gets out at 3:00. I've been meeting him at the pickleball court at 3:30. So we've been playing pickleball hardcore. We played like
teaching them young
matches.
whippersnappers how to
What's
play
that?
some pickleball. Teaching them young whippersnappers how
We
to
literally
play
played a couple of young kids yesterday. It was fun. I was sore as heck that night. I had to go drop in the hot tub. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
But I think the right, like that will change over time. And obviously now that you have one kid in the house, not 3 kids in the house that you're trying to balance all of that stuff with. And in another few years, theoretically, you'll have 0 kids in the house, right? Unless they all decide to move back with mom and dad, which I'm sure your wife would absolutely love. That your goal may change at that point. But what you need to do is a few times throughout the year, and whether it's quarterly or every 6 months, is sit down and first examine that goal. Is that still your goal? And then are you meeting that goal? And if not, to make sure that you're not running into that burnout down the road, run yourself through that process. What am I doing that I shouldn't be doing? What is the thing that's causing me the most stress, taking the most time, contributing the least to my overall enjoyment of my life, my business, and that end that you have in mind, right? And once you've kind of nailed that, then you can move into the actual like business building stuff. And Scott, I want to just kind of run through the bullet points that I have in my head. And then I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. So the first thing would be starting with the end in mind. And once you know what your goal is, then the next thing that I would do is figure out where you want to start making that money and choose a niche. That's like to A and B. I can be, persuaded either way about whether you want to say, okay, I'm really passionate about fishing. Let me figure out a way to monetize fishing. Or you can pick kind of the channel that you're going to monetize first and start to bring in that revenue and then choose the niche based on what works inside of that channel. I'm kind of flexible on those two things. But once you have your niche, so you have your goal, you have your niche, and you have that first place that you're making revenue, then you really need to focus on building the audience. And once you've started to do the audience building, then you can start worrying about redundancy and revenue and some of those other kinds of things. Does that make sense just as a general roadmap for people? Is there anything massively missing from that?
No, not at all. And guys, like I'm going to share with you guys like one thing that is critical to everything that I've ever done that's been successful. Now I'm going to tweak it a little bit, but I would say what you landed on there at the end, Chris, the audience, that is the secret, right? And like I said before, like if you can build the audience, everything else is a piece of cake. I actually just shot a video that's going to go up on YouTube. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, here's a little plug, subscribe to the channel. You'll get notifications. I found a guy that is selling $420,000 worth of digital products. And you know what they are? Woodworking plans. How is he selling that many on Etsy? There's no way that there's that many people on Etsy. And you're right. There's not that many on Etsy looking for woodworking plans. He has a YouTube channel of 300,000 subscribers. And those are driving people to go buy his templates. He doesn't run sales over there. Nothing. $420,000 he's making in profit, by the way. I did the math. And that's all from an audience in woodworking. So what I have learned over the years, every single thing that I've ever done, it all happened because of the audience. If I go back to The Amazing Seller, and like Chris said, when I started that, I didn't start that and go, I'm going to build a business about Amazon and about, like private labeling and e-commerce. I'm going to do that. I didn't say that. What I said was, I am going to report on a podcast my journey of what I'm doing right now on Amazon. And I'm going to help people because I'm a little bit further maybe than someone else, maybe 10 steps ahead. And I'm just going to share that and we'll see what happens, right? I don't know how I'm going to make money with it. I have no idea, right? I mean, I have some ideas because, I've done it before and I know that there's ways to monetize, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. All I'm going to worry about is pouring as much energy into the audience. That is it. And I did that for 56 episodes before I made my first dime. And that first dime, by the way, was from a tool that I recommended called Jungle Scout. Greg Mercer, good friend of mine, $100 million company now, 100 plus employees. He wants employees. Actually, I don't think that he does because I don't think he's 100% involved in the business anymore. But the business grew into this massive thing that I never would have wanted that kind of responsibility. But his product, which was like a $67 product, I made like a 20% commission on it or something like that. It wasn't even recurring. Made my first sale on the 56th episode. So I sat down and recorded 56 podcast episodes, 56, because I was just building the audience. That's it. Right. It's funny because I think Cody's with us here from Everbee, by the way. What's up, Cody? And Cody actually has a great community of Etsy people, right? And he said, hey, you're more than welcome to come in and help people if you want to. And I'm like, cool. All right. So I went over there and I started to just tell people that I was launching, a video on something, and I was sharing what we were doing. Nothing in return. I wasn't even collecting an email. Okay. I was just saying, hey, go to the YouTube video. Right. And I started to kind of like rebuild an audience from Etsy people, right? That were looking to, better themselves in the Etsy world. But my point is this: I went over there not thinking I was going to sell them anything. I was going over there to genuinely help the people. And it's funny, sometimes you get people go, yeah, what's the catch? What do you really want? What do you want? What do you want from me? I'm like, nothing. I don't want anything from you. I want you to go watch the video and get some value and then think that, I helped you and you're thankful and you watch more. But that's what I want right now. Right now, are you going to maybe buy something down the line? Are you going to, yeah, possibly, maybe not. That's okay. But that's the whole strategy. And so now, and I said this to Chris, and this is like, I'm sharing everything with you guys right now. What I want to do for the next 5-10 years is I want to be able to peel back the curtain and show things like how we're building brand creators, how we're building our YouTube channel. Like, I'm so invested in YouTube right now, and I'm just obsessed with it in a sense because it's a great audience building platform. And I know that if I can really learn that, then I'm not going to say I'm going to teach it, but I can share it. Right. And if I can share that, and if you can build an audience too, whether it's on YouTube or content site, whatever, you can probably direct that traffic over to an Etsy store, right? Or build an email list, all of those other things. So anyway, Chris, another little tangent there for you.
I, for one, am shocked that we have tangents involved in this process.
Yes.
So Scott, would you disagree with that general outline, right? So again, like, you had the luxury of building the audience because you were already out of that 9-to-5 job. Not everybody does. And I know as we get into like the more detailed, what we would do in 2023 version of this plan, this will make a little bit more sense. But if you're starting with the goal, then you need to find a niche, find a revenue source, build an audience, and then worry about the diversification, right? So what does that look like in 2023? If you're sitting down with young Scott Volker, 30-year-old Scott Volker, what does that plan look like that you're laying out for him?
Yeah. Okay. Before I get to that, let me just say, because you had said like, well, you had the luxury of not having your 9-to-5, so you could focus on building the audience. But here's what I'm going to tell you. When I was working a 9-to-5, and I was basically building my audience while I was working the photography studio. So I was doing photography studio and I was doing video transfer business. So I had two businesses. Basically they were one, but they were two, because I was doing video transfer work and I was doing photography with my wife. On the side, by the way, I was building an audience for photography people that were online that wanted to learn how to use Photoshop templates. So I was doing that, also doing the other, right? I was building the audience just on the side, right? So it's always come down to the audience, and it's not something that you have to do. It doesn't have to be a full-time thing. If you're like side hustling, like building the audience is probably the biggest asset you could have, because everything else will become easy. And you'll have leverage. Who knows? Maybe someone will want to sponsor a post or something like that, or you want to do a sponsor on a video, something like that. So, okay, I was going to answer your original question. Did you have something else to say?
Yeah, let's get to that here in a second. But I think the question in most people's head, and I think this will be a little bit more clear as we get into the detailed plan, is like, so are you telling me to build the audience first, or like, should I start something and then focus on the audience building? The real key, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the real lesson in the audience building is that is the critical thing for long-term success.
Yeah.
The early revenue channel, that can go away. The later revenue channels, they can go away. But the audience, is going to be the thing that is that consistent thread throughout all of those things. And so it's also the thing that people often forget, especially when they become channel dependent, right? So you got your goal of getting out of the 9 to 5. I want to work 4 hours a day. I want to spend every afternoon with my daughter and do 4 hours worth of tea time, whatever it is, right? And I'm going to use Etsy to do that. And then the audience building portion of that gets forgotten. And so the question, and again, I think this will get a little clearer as we dive into like the detailed plan of what you would give to 30-year-old Scott Volker, but is kind of when that comes in and what the priority should be. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, but I don't want anybody to think that building an audience is not important. That is the critical thing, regardless of what channel you choose, right? Whether you're building a YouTube audience, a group of raving fans on Etsy, whether you're launching an Amazon business, an e-commerce store, you're just side hustling, doing something else, you're writing a blog, whatever it is, the audience is going to be the thing that ties you through, regardless of how you're monetizing that. And so it really just comes down to when you're doing that and how you're doing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, okay. I love this question. And yes, I just want to make audience building like something that you can't even put a price tag on, because if you can, number one, build an audience and then you learn how to do it, you can do it again. Right. Like I've done several times. Now you do have to start over in a sense and start rebuilding a little bit if you're going into a new direction like we have, but, and it can be a little slow going. But what I would say is, now that we have Etsy in the picture now, right? Like, so I didn't have Etsy in my rear view mirror, at all. Like, oh, I see something there coming. Oh, okay, cool. I didn't see it until actually it was my business partner in the last ecom brand, a neighbor of mine, who introduced it to my wife, who started it as a side hustle. She built hers into a 6-figure Etsy little business. And then my wife did it on the side, made 20,000 her first year, and then just under 70 grand the second. And that kind of got me thinking, oh my gosh, like this is cool. Print on demand or digital products. I'm like, this is great. Etsy, right? So what I would do, again, if I'm starting over, if I'm advising even my son, I'm like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to build the audience. And it is going to be dependent on what you're more comfortable with. I'm comfortable with video. My son can do video. I know you can do video. And so I would start on YouTube, because I think YouTube right now is, a lot of people think it's oversaturated. It's really not, because there's so much opportunity now for channels that aren't big, right? That don't have a lot of subscribers. And it's really just about you showing up with a topic that people are interested in, coming up with good hooks, good content, and then building that audience over time. Because what that's going to do is that's going to now build your email list. All right. I mean, having our YouTube channel, like we've added, let's see, we just crossed 62,000 subscribers. We started really focusing back on it with 28,000. So we've added just about 30,000, a little over 30,000 subscribers in like 7 months. Right. And now those people have came over and grew our email list. Not all of them, but some of them, let's say 5,000 of them came over and joined our email list, joined our Facebook community, right? Like all of the different things, all because we're posting video, and those things are constantly working. So I'm looking at that now. On the other side of it, it's like, okay, what's the quickest way to monetize it? Well, you can run YouTube ads, but if you don't have any views yet, a lot of views, you can't really do that. So I'd be thinking, what products can I be launching on Etsy? Because I can immediately make sales to an audience that's not necessarily my audience yet, right? And then that way there, if people are seeing what I'm doing, like if I was a gardener, I'd be making gardening videos and I'd be selling gardening t-shirts or gardening gloves or aprons or things like that. But I'd have my YouTube channel where I was getting the audience for gardeners, right? So to me, it would start with like, where are you going to get the attention? And I don't want attention that's like Twitter attention, where it's like quick and it's gone. I mean, Twitter has worked for a lot of people. It's not my thing. I'm not a good writer. So that's why that doesn't work for me. I'm more visual. Like even, Instagram or any of those where you have followers. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm more of a fan of like an evergreen asset, or an approach to audience building. So to me, it would be leveraging something like YouTube, because it is a search engine. And then from there, launching products on Etsy that are in my niche, starting to build that email list on day one. And I can even do a giveaway now with the products that I have on Etsy to build the email list and then let them know I have videos or I have content, right? So all of those things. That's what I would do if I was to give that advice to young Scott Voelker.
So in that plan, just trying to get granular here, right? So we're starting with the end in mind. That's kind of solid. We need to know what the goal is. Are you then, before you're looking at a way to monetize, before you're even thinking about building the audience, is that, so you're saying, all right, I want to get free of my 9 to 5. I want to work 4 hours a day, whatever your goal is as the person listening to this. Are you then diving right into the niche selection portion of this? Or are you going channel specific first? Does that make sense? So you say, okay, my goal is to make $50,000 a year and I want to work 4 hours a day. Are you then going through the niche selection, or are you looking to validate a channel where you could make that revenue before you do anything else? Like, what is the next step? So your goal, right? What is the next step from there?
Yeah. My biggest thing is like, and we've taught this in the past on, it's so funny because every single channel, it doesn't matter when we're into niche validation and niche research, it always comes down to like, find the niche if you can that you're interested in and that you have a passion around. So do a self audit, right? Of yourself, what you're interested in, right? And so like I'm looking at my daughter, right? 15 years old. She's into beach volleyball. If I was advising her, I'm not going to do it now because I don't want her to focus on anything else but school and beach volleyball, but it would be create a channel for, young women beach volleyball players and just go hard at posting content to build up that audience. And then over here on Etsy, we have some cool merch that you can buy, or, different items that you can buy that are related with some cool sayings, beachy sayings and things like that. Right. And then I build the email list so you can let people know when you got a new video out and those things. Like, that's how I look at it. So it's like, you have to look at yourself. Like, what are you either good at? What's your profession? We saw someone in a video I posted on YouTube recently. And it was someone put out a course, not even a course. It was like a study guide for becoming a nurse. So, and then it's funny, you get someone in the comments, they're like, yeah, but how would I do that? I'm not a nurse. I'm like, that's not the point. The point is this: if you are a nurse, or maybe you're going to school to be a nurse, you can publish content about becoming a nurse or being a nurse, right? So that's where you would say, oh, well, I'm a nurse, or I'm a lawyer, or, I'm a doctor, or whatever, right? Like, I'm a mechanic, I'm a tow truck driver, like whatever it is. Like, literally, Chris, there's a tow truck guy that started a YouTube channel. He's got over 1 million some subscribers, where he goes and shows people how he gets people stuck or unstuck out of the mud. And now he's got all this merch. He's got tow ropes. He's got all this different stuff. Right. So all I'm saying is, you have to look at your own self. Like, if you told me that, oh, you know what? If you do a YouTube video about towing people out of the mud, you can make a lot of money. I'd be like, that doesn't interest me. I'm not going to tow people out with a truck. I don't have a truck. I'm not into that. Right. Right. But if you're saying to me like, hey, Scott, like, we're doing stuff on pickleball. Ooh, now we're talking. Maybe we do something on pickleball. Maybe we start bringing something to the market. And I've thought about this too, by the way, but I'm like, no, Scott, no, put the blinders on. It's not within your lines. Right. So yeah, it's like, squirrel, chase it. But yeah. So did that answer your question, Chris? It's about going after your passion or your interest.
Right. So the second step is then really finding a niche. And what I'm trying to pull this back to is kind of like a roadmap that people could follow for this. So obviously we're starting with the goal. The second thing would then be doing that like interests inventory to find the niche. And you guys have heard us talk about this in the past, unless it's your first time hanging out with us. The touch list, I think, is a really important concept that most people blaze over because it's so simple. And somebody commented on a YouTube video that you brought it up on the other day. That's like, yeah, people just keep saying to do this. And if everybody did this, then we'd all have our niches already. It's like, yeah. So if you aren't familiar with the concept of a touch list, right, grab a pen and paper and write down everything that you touch over the course of the day, including a pen and paper, right? So if you grab a cup of coffee, well, then you have potentially interest in the coffee or coffee lover niche, right? If you drive your daughter to beach volleyball, then there's potentially the interest in the beach volleyball niche. there, you got in the car, so you touched the car. Do you really like cars? Right. Then you could lean something towards the car niche, but you need to figure out what that niche or that passion is. And then you can start to think about the audience building and the first revenue source. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it does always come down to, you have to do the niche validation, and you have to see, like, is there something out there that I can get involved in? And it starts with you. So I can't say for you, like, yeah, just go out there and, do a soccer channel. Like, if you're not into soccer, it doesn't really pertain to you. Right. I would say that there's not really a niche out there that you can't make money at. Now, there might be less opportunity on Etsy for products, because Etsy is a certain marketplace for certain products, or, Amazon is a little bit more broader. eBay is a little bit broader, right? But there's channels that you can take that audience and sell them products, right? So to me, it does always come down to, the audience that you're looking to build. Now, are there more profitable audiences that you can build, or niches that you can build? 100%, 100%. But I would argue that to make $100,000 pretty much in any niche out there, if you had the audience, like, some of it might be on Etsy, some of it might not be on Etsy,
So they have the goal, they have the niche. Is in your mind, right? So you're talking to 30-year-old Scott. Are you then looking for a way, because he hates his 9-to-5 job, right? He hates installing windows and hauling shingles and doing all of the things that you did in your late 20s, early 30s, although he does still love his mullet. Probably not at that point, but
no, I had short hair. That's what.
Are you then immediately jumping into the audience build, or are you trying to earn that first dollar somewhere like Etsy to help you fund the audience build side of that? Does that make sense? Like, is it the same time? Are you doing, blog posts, YouTube videos, whatever that audience build is, before you go somewhere like Etsy? Like, what does that process look like once you know where you want to go?
Yeah, no, well, I'm using the YouTube side because that's kind of where I'm playing right now. So, and I like that. But we've done blog content. We've got content sites that we still own right now that, I publish, 1 to 3 articles per week, for that. But yeah, I would say, because in the very first thing, you're always thinking like, okay, well, this is great. I don't want to spend a year building my audience before I monetize it. Now, if you could, you would make more money. That I would say, if you could only focus on building the audience for a year, that's it, and just give value, you will make more money. Now, I'm not going to say you will make more money over the length of your business, but that first initial time that you start to launch products, you'll make a lot more money because they're kind of waiting for it. But in the meantime, you could be still selling products. But what I would do is, as I'm building the audience, I'd have products that I'm building over here that gets another audience, right? An audience, it's the same audience, but it's a different audience on a different platform, is what I'm saying. So it's just people that are buying those types of products in that niche. This over here, they're consuming content in that niche, right? But I'd be building the email list so that way there, I could send them to my YouTube or send them to my Etsy, right? And as I'm selling products on Etsy, I'm building my email list at the same time in that niche. So that's kind of like that little hub that I'd be building. So that way there, I'm not waiting for the audience to build on YouTube, let's say, right? I can kind of get that going. Although nowadays on YouTube, you can literally get a video to get 10,000 views with the right, in the right niche, of course, but with the right title and the right thumbnail and things like that, you can really get growth pretty quickly. But yeah, Chris, I mean, I would say, I'm looking at like, how can I make money at this? I'm not going to make it from YouTube ads right away. So how do I make money in the short term? I'd run a giveaway with the products that I created on Etsy. And then I would build the email list, let people know about the products, probably start to make some sales, start to learn some Etsy stuff, start to run some Etsy ads, and try to get that thing rolling.
So it sounds like there may be a little bit of a split in the path there, right? If you are one of those people like me, like Scott, like many people, and you like seeing that scoreboard number, or you just don't have the runway to do the audience build up front, then you do want to look for a low friction revenue source like Etsy, where we can be audience specific, niche specific, and start building an audience that way while we're also spending a few hours a week creating content, be that a blog post, YouTube video, whatever those evergreen assets are that we're looking for. Is that an accurate summary of the way that you're thinking about that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good.
And, you know, if you have $1 million in the bank and you just want to do this, then go for the audience build.
Yeah.
But if you're really trying to get out of that 9 to 5, then you need to think about this in a parallel path. And I know it sounds a little more overwhelming than just say, hey, go start on Etsy, but you don't want to forget about the building the audience portion of this. And so, yes, I would say, you know, first 30 days, right? Let's say, Scott, today you've chosen your niche, you know your why. If you need that money sooner rather than later, spend those first few days creating products to sell somewhere like Etsy. If Etsy doesn't work in your chosen niche, that's totally cool. Find somewhere that does. And there's a lot of other marketplaces out there that would allow you to do something very similar that may work better for your niche. And then once you have a few of those products up, is that when you start to add in the audience build, or are you doing those like side by side?
I think I'm doing them side by side, because I know that once I get some content up there, that it's going to start giving me the opportunity to start building that audience. And I'm impatient. I want to start building that like as soon as possible, you know, like I'm, you know, chomping at the bit, you know, to get it out there. And then what's cool is once you start getting some traction on your traffic, then it gets exciting. And then you can kind of see that working, even though it's not money, it's attention, right? I mean, we're in
that,
the world
I think
of
is where
attention.
that I think is where a lot of people fall off the bandwagon, right? They get really hyped up about their why. They're like, I love fast fishing, right? And they sit down, they write 500 blog posts, and nothing happens for 6 months, right? If you're not getting traffic and you're not making sales, traffic meaning YouTube views, website visitors, whatever, and you're not making sales, that can be frustrating. So if you're somebody that needs that little extra piece of motivation, having either those early traffic numbers coming in because you made an amazing YouTube video that your audience absolutely loves, or the revenue coming in from a channel like Etsy gives you that extra spark of motivation to keep pushing forward. Does that make sense? You need to have that little reward, that dopamine hit coming back. And with content creation, honestly, your first few YouTube videos are going to suck. Your first few blog posts are going to suck. Your first few emails, they're going to suck. Your very first Etsy design, unless you're a great designer, is going to suck, right? But getting those out and getting those up is really the most important thing. And so for me, like if you're a person that needs that dopamine hit, then I would probably look at spending like the first 2 weeks building out those print-on-demand products, whatever it is that I can do to get something up and start to see numbers coming back on Etsy, even if it's not sales, right? It's like first it's visits, then it adds to carts and favorites, and then it's sales. And once I have something up that I can get that reward with, then I'm really looking at starting to create the content, which leads us down the audience building path. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Here's what I would say to that. Here's how I would approach that, because I know the audience is so important and so valuable, and it's an asset that I'm building for long term. If I need money in the short term, I'm literally going to be flipping products on eBay. Like that's what I'm doing. Right. We might even post a couple of videos here on the channel. My son and I have been talking about possibly doing like a little challenge where I have him go out and take $100 and turn it into $200 or $300. So we're thinking about doing that, but literally like you guys are going to be able to watch this next week on the channel, or if you're watching this after the fact, you can go to the YouTube channel. I posted, what was it? 5 or 6 side hustles that made me $50,000 a year. And one of them was selling some stuff on eBay. My wife and I found these little cedar bridges for the garden. We sold them. We did a bunch of things, but that's what I would do. I mean, that is so easy to make money right now. Like you could literally flip something, buy something and flip it. It's just work. You got to do it. But if I need money in the short term, $500, I'm going to go do that. And I'm going to build my audience, right? Build them. It might not even be related. Like if I'm flipping product, it doesn't have to be related to the other thing, because if you need money, now, if you're just working your 9 to 5, you're like, I want to get out of my 9 to 5. I want to get out of my 9 to 5. There's no quick way of making that happen. You're not going to launch products on Etsy and automatically be able to leave your job. You're not going to be able to go to Amazon, launch some products, immediately be able to leave your job. So why not put that time into an asset that will eventually be able to do that? And it will be such a long-term asset.
So the question then becomes, right? So we're kind of doing this parallel path with something potentially like Etsy, if it's applicable in your niche, and building the content. So Scott, you're starting in a niche that would work on Etsy, right? Just to give you this theoretical. Are you flipping the products just to fill in that short-term cash, or are you flipping the products while you're creating the content, launching the brand, and like creating the products on Etsy? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I see where you're going with it. There's a lot of different things that you're doing, right? And if you're doing this side hustle style, there's not a lot of time. So this is where you have to kind of allocate your time. So if you need the money in the short term, like next week, you got to flip products. If you don't need money by next week and you're just doing this to try to slowly get to build that, then you're going to start launching your products on Etsy. That's going to take a little bit of time, run some Etsy ads, get that going, right? You might even have to flip products to make some extra cash to run some Etsy ads. But I'm launching, and I'm not saying you got to be so aggressive on, like, I wouldn't be launching aggressively on Etsy because I'd be taking some of that time that I have available, splitting it and making sure that I'm putting out at least one video a week. Like that would be my thing. One video a week. That's my audience build, right? And then I'm going to put maybe 5 products up, but there's really one design. So I'm going to create one design, 5 products. And I'm going to repeat that for several weeks.
Okay, so I think I like how this is coming together. And in case you guys didn't notice, we're pulling this together as we're talking through this. Essentially what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is it all depends on timeline, right? Like in the ideal world, we would just build an audience. And once we have the audience, we'd wait for them to tell us how they want to be monetized, right? Like they come to us and they ask us for a course. Maybe we launch some merch, we qualify for YouTube ads, we start running ads on the blog, right? But that's kind of the long-term view of that. The medium-term view of that, so you're still in your 9-to-5 job and you have more than enough money to make ends meet, but you're trying to build something that you can do for the long term. Step 1 would be to start to launch some of those products somewhere like Etsy. And then like 1B would be to really start the audience build. If you're in a very short-term cash crunch, or you want some extra money to start to fund new camera equipment, Etsy ads, some of those kinds of things, that's when you would then add in something like flipping on eBay. Does that make sense?
Yep. And it's funny that you just said, and does that make sense? Robert says that Chris needs a bass fishing header. Does that make sense? Footer with questionable expression on his face in between.
I'm just glad that they can tell that that's my questionable face and not,
that's beautiful.
Not anything any more annoying than that. And so, Scott, it sounds like, and again, this really depends on your timeline, right? So if you are in a short-term cash crunch, then adding in like the product flipping, or you just want a little bit of extra overhead while you're building out this other stuff, that's where that would really come in. Once you start getting into the audience building and you have a steady revenue stream, be it ads or be it something coming in from the Etsy sales or Amazon sales, what then are you doing to make sure that you are maximizing that and future-proofing it? So you have some money coming in. Maybe you're not at your goal number yet, but you have the audience building going on. You're doing that consistently. You have some money coming in from that first revenue source, wherever that's coming from, YouTube ads, Etsy, whatever that is. What's the plan from there to get you the rest of the way out?
Yeah. So, and what Chris is doing right now is he's doing a business plan that is forecasting what you're going to do next. I personally, at this stage, Chris, I think like that plan is enough to build off of. Like, I think by doing this, you're going to then see where your time is better spent. You're going to learn from this. You're going to see what maybe Etsy products are starting to take off. You're going to focus a little bit more time there right now. Right. So I think in a perfect world, if all of that starts to really work together and they're both working equally, then we're going to spend time to build out the product line. Cause obviously we build out the product line more, we're going to have more opportunity there, make more money. And so to me, I don't look at like, how else am I going to monetize this other than keep being consistent? That's the key word there. Consistent content, building audience, email list, same thing. Email list, maybe YouTube, maybe blog content, whatever. And then over here, we have products where we're able to monetize. But while you're building that audience and you're getting your own traffic, guess what else happens? We now get to turn on another monetization stream. And that is most likely going to be either YouTube ads or ads that are going to be placed on your website. So there's another, then we might have affiliate products that come into the mix now because we have attention, we have the audience. So to me, that's like the next thing once we start to see that we're getting audience attention and we're starting to build that and we're starting to get some sales over here on Etsy. So I wouldn't go too far down the line with trying to plan everything, because what we got right there is consistency on those things. That's where
and I think that makes perfect sense. The last key, and again, I just was jotting notes down here, would be to have some redundancy in revenue, right? So whether that is once you are doing those things consistently, and you know how much time that takes you, how much extra time do you have still with that goal in mind? And then is there something else that you can do? And this is where entrepreneurial ADD tends to take over for people, where it's like, I have all of these things that I can do. And what you need to be looking at there is, what is the lowest friction way that you can add some redundancy to your revenue in case your YouTube ads go away. So if you're starting with the YouTube side of things or the blog side of things, and you're doing the audience build first, that's when you would want to add in Etsy products, something on Amazon, right? Merch. That's why you see YouTubers doing merch and those kinds of things, is to add that little bit of redundancy in revenue. If you're coming at this from the other side and you're doing the audience building and you're really, earning the money from a source like Etsy, then you want to kind of pay a little bit more attention, use that extra hour a week to figure out how to continue to grow everything, but also potentially monetize the audience you have outside of Etsy, your YouTube channel, your email list, your blog, wherever that is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I love it. And I would like to just, again, we're going to wrap this up. Going here for like 90 minutes, but I knew this was going to be a good discussion. I appreciate you guys hanging out. Here's what I would like to ask you guys, because we do have plans to share more about our own internal brand building of brand creators and Rock Your Brand and the YouTube channel, because that's what we're doing. We're audience building here as well. Now, we have a website that we've also been building for my wife's, Etsy shop. And that actually started before the Etsy shop. And we're building that right now as we speak. So we're doing all of the things we're talking about in various niches, but we really want to. And again, if I was to say, okay, Scott, what do you want to show up and teach people? And to me, it's very clear: audience building. So that's like the first time that I think I've said that publicly, that's really what excites me. That's really where I see opportunity. And if I can help someone build an audience of people in their niche, making money from that is easy, right? That's the easy part. The audience build, I don't want to say it's hard, but that is a lot of times overlooked. And so what I would like to ask you guys is, number one, would you like us to start teaching more on audience building? And would you like us to peel back the curtain and show you more on the inside of brand creators and what we're doing there to grow our audience? So if you guys could drop that in the comments, I'd like to know. All right. So that would be awesome. Oh, and Robert wants to know, did we sell the company? No, because here's the deal. We have sold a company or an e-com company. So I know the process. I know what it's like. It's pretty in-depth process. E-commerce is a little bit more involved because you have inventory and payback and all that stuff. We did not sell this because this here, we just rebranded. We pivoted out of this company. So we took a pretty good hit on revenue. And now we're working to get back there. And I don't want to say we have to get back to that exact number, but we definitely are going to work towards building it into a 7-figure brand. So brand creators is what we're talking about. So we've taken that brand more or less, I don't want to say shut it down, but we pivoted it, rebranded, and now we're kind of working towards, what we're going to do to build that business into the business that we want to be working in, and to me, it's really about, yes, Etsy is a little sliver of it, because audience building and all of the things that come with audience building. So that way there you can sell a whole bunch of products on Etsy, like that guy is with the woodworking of $400,000 a year on digital templates, right? So that's really what we're looking for. So yeah, so if you guys could drop that in the comments, let us know, give us a little love on the video too. That would be amazing.
All right. So Scott, before we wrap it up for today, I wanted to kind of recap that roadmap for everybody. It's really starting with the end in mind, knowing what your goal is. And it's not just about defining the number. It's also about defining why you're doing this to begin with. If your initial monetary goal is just to replace that 9-to-5, that's cool, but that's a terrible why. If your why is the number, you're doing this wrong, and you're going to run into the same issue that Scott ran into. Maybe you won't have adult chickenpox, but you will have something happen in your life. You're going to have more stress than you need, and you're going to miss out on the same things that you're missing out on right now. So starting with the end in mind, to me, is absolutely the key. Once you know what your number and your why are, then you're going to jump in and take a look at who you can serve, right? This is not necessarily that you have to be the world's nicest person to all of these people all of the time. That's not what I mean when I say serve. That's the niche that we're going after. Who are the people that I can connect with when I get to the audience building side of this thing? And then we're going to do two things kind of simultaneously, depending on what our runway looks like. We're going to start building an audience somewhere where we feel comfortable. If you feel comfortable with video, YouTube is a great place to be. If you don't, if you like to write, then blogs are a great place to be, right? If you fall somewhere in the middle, then shoot me that and we'll figure out a way to make that work. I'm sure that's possible as well, right? Like for example, I hate typing, but I can talk mediocrely well, moderately well. I just lost how I was going to say that sentence, but I can talk decently well, I guess is probably where I'm going with that. My high school English teachers are all screaming right now. But if I'm writing a blog post, which I do weekly, right? I just do speech to text. So if you hate writing, but you don't want to be on video, there's still a way to kind of fit yourself into that situation. So you have to figure out who you're going to serve and then how you're going to serve them. And then the next thing, which is kind of like part 2B there, is how are you going to monetize that? Is it something like Etsy, or do you have the runway to wait to start to do that audience build? And once you're building that audience and you have that first revenue channel coming in, you need to be doubling down on what you're doing and then using whatever free time you have. Again, going back to keeping that end in mind, right? If you only want to work 4 hours a day and you're working 3.5, then you have a half an hour a day to look at something else, which would be really building the redundancy in the revenue, finding another way to monetize your audience, or figuring out a better way to grow your audience with that half an hour so that the monetization you're already doing works better. Does that make sense, Scott? Am I missing anything there in that recap?
No, we just had someone comment, the thing I must do is be consistent. And I agree 125%. That's major. So, yeah, so I totally agree. But yeah, guys, this has been great. I know we had a couple of questions. We addressed a couple of them here. Someone had said, I've got a YouTube channel. I post content on Medium. Do you think that can work together? And I think absolutely 100%. Yes, it can work together, and you should leverage that.
Don't post on Medium. Post on your own website. If you're already creating that content, Medium is nice because you don't have to create anything. The problem is you don't own that traffic. You always want to be the person that owns that traffic if you can. And so my suggestion would be take that content that you're already creating, build a basic WordPress site, and start to be able to capture that audience, which isn't something you can do very effectively on Medium. But having written and video content together is a strategy that works really well. And it's what we're doing at Brand Creators, in case you haven't noticed, right? Like it's literally what we do. I do a lot more of the writing. Scott does a lot more of the video. We have a little bit of crossover in how everything works. Like obviously we're both on this live right now, but we do both of those things together because different people like to consume content in different formats. And doing a full guide on SEO like we did over at brandcreators.com, that would be the world's most boring video, but it's content that people need. And you want to know some of the ins and outs. And it turns out a bunch of people every day want to know the ins and outs of that stuff, and they come to read it on the blog. It's not something you would ever necessarily create as a YouTube video. Scott, another one that we had came in from Danielle. She said, are you guys doing the 7-day Cha-Ching Challenge course again? And you should be able to find that anytime over at brandcreators.com/sales. That is something you can do self-paced at this point. So you should be able to grab that over there. And then the other one I had flagged here, Scott, was just curious. Chris's plain t-shirt and background contrasts with Scott t-shirt and background. Does this say anything about each of their personal approaches to business and why they play off each other so well? What are your thoughts on the psychological framing of our environments and our clothes?
I think that's hysterical. And it's funny because when we both got on, we didn't know what color shirts we had on today. And I go, hey, did we call each other? Like that was kind of strange. So yeah, we do. We think a lot alike. So we thought of red today. We said we should probably put our pinkish salmon color red shirt on. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think Scott's background, Scott has some really nice bookshelves. I'm in essentially a concrete room that I have some stuff in, and we were literally talking about kind of changing my environment up a little bit before we got on too. So I thought that was funny. But I think, Scott, you and I have very similar personalities. We're like 1 degree apart, which I think is why sometimes people think we're disagreeing on things, but it's really just how we think through stuff. Like you and I were talking the other day about like my process for coming up with ideas for things. I have to think of the idea and then validate that it's a good idea. You don't think in ideas, you think more in like titles, right? So it's like, can you give me a title on that? And I'm like, if you tell me it's a decent idea, then yeah, but that's just the little bit of a difference in the way that we think. But generally speaking, and Scott, this is something that came out a bunch in your story, right? And there's a reason you wrote a book called The Take Action Effect. You are an action taker, and so am I. And you and I had a joke, and it came up a lot in 2019, that you and I like to, run through walls rather than looking for a door. We're just going to run through the wall because we see the opportunity on the other side, and then we'll figure out how to build a door behind us. Not everybody operates that way. Scott and I both do. And I think that that little bit of organized chaos, for lack of a better term, has served both of us fairly well. And it's one of the reasons we work so well together, because we can pivot quickly, right? If I had a very organized, very methodical personality, Scott would probably drive me insane. But because we're very similar personality-wise in that aspect, in terms of the action taking and those kinds of things, I think that's a big part of the reason that we work so well together, because you and I both have the ability to sit down and go, all right, here's a cool opportunity. Here's how this works in the audience building framework. Does it serve the audience? Yes, go do it. And then figure out how to systemize it, then figure out how to build the door behind you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I love it. And let's just kind of wrap it up there. I did, again, want to thank you guys for hanging out with us. I did want to give you guys a little bit of a heads up. We are going to do another live next week. And this one is going to be titled Behind the Scenes, Pivoting and Building a Seven-Figure Info Business Over Again. So what Chris and I are going to do is we're going to kind of give you a little bit of a behind the scenes look of what we're currently doing, some of our targets, and really how we are going to be building our audience. That's what we're going to be sharing. So we're going to kick it off with that. So we figured we'd do this one first, kind of let you know kind of like this story, and then we're going to build on it next week. So make sure that you tune in, make sure that you subscribe to the channel or the podcast, and that way there you won't miss an episode. And we have a bunch of episodes coming out. I've got a great interview with a good friend of mine, Steve Chu, who just wrote a book. He's a perfect example of building a $2 million a year business, but yet kind of part-time, because he puts family first. That's the name of his book, by the way, Family First Entrepreneur. So that one's going to be coming out. And I've got some other good videos that we've got in the pipeline that are going to be coming out, because they are getting a lot of good feedback. So I'm going to keep creating them and keep helping you guys. All right. So if you guys have any other questions for us, let us know in the comments. And until next time, take care, take action, and we'll see you soon. Take care, guys.